Okay, so last time we left off at Barnabas chapter 4, I think 6. We could kind of recap a little bit. Chapter starts out, well, it kind of starts before that. It says, So then, brethren, the long-suffering one foresaw the people whom he prepared in his beloved should believe in guilelessness, and made all things plain to us beforehand, that they should not be shipwrecked by conversion to their law. So the idea is that the law is theirs. Their law. The way that they see it, the way that they observe it, the way that they regard it. He's saying not to be like them. So he's trying to differentiate between his audience and the people he's writing to, and those who adhere to the law. Again, their law. Not necessarily the law, right? So he kind of makes a separation between the law and their law. Like the law, if used lawfully, is correct, let's say, but not according to the way that they use it. And then he says, we ought then to inquire earnestly into these things which now are, right? And again, this is kind of where I got the notion about that everything sort of stacks up into what is, what was, and what is to come. Because it's all detailed kind of in the Epistle of Barnabas in so many words. It says, we ought to inquire earnestly into the things which now are, right, and seek out those which are able to save us, again, in the present time. And then let us utterly flee from all the works of lawlessness, which he defines as basically adherence to their law. In other words, the way that they see it, the way they present it. Lest the works of lawlessness overcome us, and we may that, and let us hate the error of, again, this present time. So he sees himself in this age, right? That we may be loved in that which is to come, right? Which is, of course, that, right? So he's saying that there is a temptation, there is a stumbling block that is at hand. So is, right, is the present term. It says, let us give no freedom to our souls to have power to walk with sinners and wicked men, lest we be made like unto them. So there is a potential fall that they could be made, that could be made, right? And it says this final stumbling block is at hand, which is written as Enoch says, right? So again, he invokes Enoch here, right? As pointing to this stumbling block, right? So the idea, first of all, just reality check. He's invoking the book of Enoch as scripture at this particular point. We know that we don't. We know that the church did not. The church at large, like, unless you include the Ethiopic church, which is like this whole other thing that was apart from church history, that we rejected the book of Enoch. So already we know that they accepted it, right, at that particular juncture, the time that then was, right? But what I think that he's referring to their law is that there is this narrowness that comes with canonizing the scripture. Again, there's a smallness that comes with you're literally blocking yourself off, because again, as we've gone over a million times, they're always coloring outside of the line. Prophets are referring to books that lie outside of the Jewish canon. So in the time of the Jews, right, the time that then was, right, they were referring to Gad the seer. They were referring to other books, Jasher, and all these other books that they refer to, right? So the Jews at the time should have recognized that they were coloring outside of canonical boundaries, right? But what their law is, what they're adhering to is the law and the prophets alone, right? Their view of the law, the scriptures, is that nothing outside of the law and the prophets is authoritative or to be really read or believed or taught or any of that stuff. So that's their worldview. He's already broken with that point of view by invoking Enoch, because Enoch was definitely not part of the law and the prophets as they understood it.
Right.
So his view is different from theirs in terms of their canon, right? So this is basically the stumbling block. The idea that the law and the prophets essentially exists according to their, right, their acceptance or rejection of certain things. In other words, it's their paradigm. Their law, right, involves basically the canon, right, as you can kind of intuit, right? And this is their stumbling block. And see, this is what you can kind of see as what's happening to the church at an early point, at a very early point, as a matter of fact. Because the fact that Jude wrote about it and that Peter seconded it, for example, the fact that Jude gave it the credence of being from Enoch himself, right, from the antediluvian times in so many words, to direct that, like when Enoch says that is for the removal of the wicked and the ungodly.
So, but what is Enoch saying here, and what passage is that in Enoch?
Well, that's just it. I don't think that he's quoting Enoch exactly. I think that he's conflating
referring to
Enoch.
him, yeah.
I think he's conflating Enoch with Daniel. I think is what we talked about like last week. But the idea is that, okay, the way the book of Enoch starts out, it says the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous. So it's directed to the elect and righteous who are to come, who will be living in the day of tribulation. What? When the wicked and the godless are to be removed, right? So then Jude affirms that it was Enoch the seventh from Adam, right? So that's he's affirming its provenance here. And then he's affirming its antiquity, the seventh from Adam, right? So then he says that he prophesied. So he's a prophet, all right, in Jude's eyes. And then he says what? Of these. And then he gives the exact quote about his what? Power and his coming, which is Enoch 1:9. All right? And so, as we see in 2 Peter, when Peter actually comes along and he affirms that we did not follow a cleverly concocted fable, meaning Enoch 1:9, when we told you about his power and his coming, but we were eyewitnesses with him on the mountain, right? In other words, we saw this power, we saw this coming that Enoch spoke of. And again, as far as the timeline is concerned, again, if you consider the timeline, you have the antediluvian age, and then you have the Christian age, right? And you have the end of the age, let's say, and you have the creation over here. Okay, so Enoch's over here in this pre-flood world, right? And then, of course, you have the law and the prophets over here in the Jewish world. And then, of course, you have the Christian world. Which is this age right here, with that which is, right? So he's talking about the stumbling block is coming right here, right? And then he talks about the future age, right? So he's talking about this, what is to come. So it's again, what is, what was, what is to come. There is the time, the times, and the half a time, etc. So everything sort of falls in line with that particular paradigm. But the idea is that he's already at variance with what became the Christian church by appealing to something outside of the law and the prophets. Because here's the kind of if you kind of get what's happening here, is it's spoken of in the book of Revelation. I'm sorry to kind of ramble, but you kind of have to see the whole constellation of ideas. They're talking about the Synagogue of Satan. And if you understand the churches as being sort of sequential, you have Ephesus, you have Smyrna, you have Pergamos, Thyatira, right? Is it Sardis, and then Philadelphia, and then the Laodicean church, right? If you see that it's sort of from beginning to end, right? The Ephesians lost their first love, right? Well, what was the first love? I mean, according to the Bible, right, that this is the love of the truth. Right, because they did not love the truth, right? They were reduced to what? The delusion, right? That I will send them strong delusion. The strong delusion is that it is the law and the prophets. See, the Synagogue of Satan comes in with their idea of that the law and the prophets are the foundation, right? But Jude is saying that the Lord's parousia, the coming of the Lord, is predicated upon Enoch, specifically 1:9. And then Peter says, when we told you about the parousia, we weren't following cleverly concocted fables. So these guys saw Enoch as a fable, something that was made up. And so here's the impetus for, these are the questions, in other words, that they're answering. They're answering questions as to this book's authenticity, because they were mainstream, down the middle Jews of the time, who believed in the canon, who believed that the law and the prophets were the primary source, whereas the apostles, Peter, Jude, and possibly James, because Jude makes an appeal to James as being his brother, right? So in other words, we're in agreement here. So if we want to give some primacy to James too, in his position being the just, their idea of Jesus is Enochian. And this is a huge problem for these people coming in, those who say that they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And so what do we see in Revelation? That these guys come in and they gain a seat, so they gain entrance, and then a little later they have a seat, right? And then they have the depths, right? So, in other words, this is Christianity taking form outside of this paradigm, because this is to the exclusion of this paradigm, right? And then the final step is that they have to come and bow at the feet. Right? This is the last state of them, is towards the Philadelphians. They come in, and the Philadelphians represent the elect. They're the ones who have a crown, right? So that they have overcome, right? And so the idea is that this notion that everything is based on the law and the prophets gets displaced at the end by this original understanding.
But
this is their original understanding.
Enoch itself gives credit to the law and the prophets, right? I mean, you have the book of parables, which foresees pretty much the entire scriptures. So Enoch affirms the law and the prophets too.
Of course,
Well,
I mean, we're not supposed to.
That's
But
how-
it's not this to the exclusion of that.
Right,
That's the thing.
right.
And that's what happens, is that everything from the
You're
law
not
and the
gonna throw
prophets,
out the baby with
even
the
what we get
bathwater.
even what we get from Jesus, right? Is he says what? That what does the law and the prophets break down to? Love the Lord your God, right? Right? And love your neighbor as yourself. So everything is sort of commentary on that. But this was the original plan, was to have a heart of flesh, if you will, instead of heart of stone. To follow the commandments from your heart, to love your neighbor as yourself, etc. is all from the heart. This is all prior to the law.
It talks about like worship in
Well-
spirit and in truth, not just the.
Well, these are the Ten
Just like the
Commandments,
law, the
right?
Spirit is
What
like
are the
the-
Ten Commandments, right? They
the
all have
fleshy
to
part
do
of our
either
worship.
with loving God, right, or loving your fellow man, respecting your father and mother and all that other stuff, right? So there's basically twofold teaching, right? That's why there's two tablets, presumably, is because that was what was original. And the law was added later, why? Because of transgressions, right?
Yep. Yep.
Well, Paul talks about that, right? The law is holy and just and good, but without the law would not have known sin. And he says in Galatians that
Yeah, it's to point out what sin is. Because of transgressions, right? But then Jesus also says, because of hardness of heart.
right, but Jesus is talking about certain laws in particular, not the whole of the law.
Well,
God gave.
but
Well, that's the original, and the original all has to do with
yeah,
the
because
heart.
he says it was not so at first.
Speaking of
Right, but the-
speaking of easy divorce specifically, not
Yeah.
speaking of the entire Torah.
Well, but it's indicative of what the law is a concession. But the law is more than just a concession. That's the thing. The law is kind of a reflection. Because look,
If you think
Because-
like in the
because
Garden
it's
of
a-
Eden, the
because
law was
this is-
still in effect, it just wasn't written down.
this is what Barnabas is kind of getting at.
Because
It's,
it wasn't
it's,
the first
it's
rebellion.
symbols
You have
and
to
it's
think of the original.
shadows and it's
Original sin.
images.
Right, exactly.
And that there's a certain kind of a I hate to use the word performance art, but there's sort of a performance art to what Moses is doing. He says he throws down the laws as a statement. Like, in other words, and also you see this in Stephen's reaction. He says that when Moses murdered the Egyptian, right? Now, his act was an act of murder, but then Stephen says that he thought that the people would understand that by his so doing, that he was going to deliver them from Egypt. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So he was acknowledging what Moses did as a kind of performance art. It was performative. It was truth by action rather than words. So his killing of the Egyptian was that the Jews would be saved. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. As a function of, Moses murdering this guy. You see what I'm saying? He was trying to say that the one sort of, and again, this is when Stephen is in like a holy state. He has the face of God. You know what I'm saying? A face of an angel. I mean, you see what I'm saying? And so, let me read on. We already talked about the Daniel stuff. So you ought to understand this, as I ask you, starting with verse 6, is being one of yourselves, and especially as loving you all above my own life. Take heed to yourselves now, and be not made like unto some, heaping up your sins and saying that the covenant is both theirs and ours. Because remember, because Paul again says the law was added because of transgressions. Jesus says sort of the same thing, that this was a concession due to a hardness of hearts, right? So hardness of hearts and transgressions are sort of the impetus of why this stuff has to be written down, but it's all reducible. He even says it was not that way from the beginning. So there's this emphasis on what was prior. Again, and Paul invokes this kind of teaching, I guess it's kind of midrashic or whatever, where he talks about that which was prior to something as being superior to it. So if that is a truism, then the original idea was that we were just supposed to have laws regarding loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves, which is what the Ten Commandments fundamentally boil down to, right? Jesus witnesses this, etc. It says, but they turned to idols. Again, they gave all their jewelry, they melted it down, and then this thing just came out of it, right?
We skip this verse here. It says, verse 7, it is ours, but in this way, they finally lose it when Moses had just received it. For the scripture, so Moses gave them the law, they immediately lost it, right? For scripture says, and Moses was in the mountain fasting 40 days and 40 nights. He received the covenant from the Lord, written on tablets of stones with the finger of God, for the hand of, so this is from God himself. Then verse 8, then they turned to idols.
Well, we just
and they
did
lost
6, Pastor. We didn't
No,
do
we're-
7 yet.
Yeah,
We just read
I
6.
skipped over 7. That was kind of my oversight. But anyways, so he's right to do that. But anyways, it all leads into 8, where it says that they turned to idols and lost it. For thus said the Lord, Moses, Moses, go down quickly, for thy people have broken the law. And what was the law? The law was, thou shalt have no gods before me, right? That was on one of the tablets, right? So they broke that law for sure, right? Was it on the Sabbath? I mean,
I don't think it says that.
I don't know. But anyways, but they had already broken it. But see, and Moses understood and cast down the 2 tables out of his hand, and their covenant was broken. Again, so this is sort of performance art on Moses' part. He didn't just say because he was angry in this particular context. He says he threw them down. Why? Because he understood that they had already broken the law, and thus the law had been broken. Right? And so their covenant was broken in order that the covenant of Jesus, the Father, should be sealed in our hearts in the hope of his faith. So again, not on tablets, but in our hearts. So this is the thing he keeps saying. Not external, internal. Not earthly, but spiritual. And so the tablets were broken what? When they hit the earth. You see what I'm saying? In other words, once the earthly, that which is earthly can destroy, you see what I'm saying, that which was written by the finger of God. Because it's subverted. Right? Because it's all about your heart and not about your behavior. Your behavior is one thing, but your heart is something else.
Intention.
Your mentality, your thinking. The people wanted Aaron to do this And
Well-
Aaron kind of didn't want to do it, but he kind of caved in to the people, right? So that's sort of representative of the failure of religion as a whole, the failure of leadership. But
So-
why does he say Moses? This is an interesting thing. I'm sorry, you were going to say
Sounds
something?
good.
Okay. The idea, okay, so let's go back to the Transfiguration, right? Here you have Moses, right? Here you have Yeshua. Okay, and then here you have Elijah.
I just want to mention right in that there should be a correlation between what you believe and how you act, so, right? Because if you believe, there's all kinds of people that do that, right? They believe one thing, and they live another way. So there should be a correlation.
Well, I know it's wrong, but in order for me to get to that point where the goal,
Right. It's like
I might have to do something that's not so.
It's not enough to believe, like he said. The demons believe in trouble. What'd you say, Jeannie? I'm sorry, cut you off.
Well, so here's the thing. Okay, so you imagine sort of that there's Moses here, right? I mean, imagine he's holding the Ten Commandments or whatever, just for visual, right? So that's Moses in the flesh, right? But he was what? He was in his exalted state here. So he is this, and he's also in his exalted state, right? So how many Moseses are there? There's two, right? Right? There's the fleshly Moses and the spiritual Moses, right? And then of course there's Yeshua, right? And again, he walks around looking and being a human
takes on
being,
the flesh.
right? But then, right, he takes on this other dimension. He becomes exalted and glorified before them. So in a sense, there are two Yeshuas. And the Gospel of Thomas tells us this too. He says, when you see the one who was not born of woman. So the fleshly Jesus was born of Mary. But this Jesus was not born of woman. It says, so fall down on your faces and worship, right? Which is exactly what the apostles did at the Transfiguration, right? So that, so you have him on two levels. And then, of course, it's the same with Elijah, right? He was Elijah as the flesh. And then, of course, there's the spirit and power of Elijah, which is him in his exalted state. So there are two Moses, there are two Jesus, there are two Elijah. So when you see the idea of somebody's name mentioned twice, it means that there are two states of this person. For example, Peter, right? Jesus says, Simon, Satan had desired to have you so that he might sift you as wheat. Why? Because there's the fleshly Simon, and then there's the spiritual Simon. In fact, he actually elaborates on that, right? So there's two ones, right? There's him before and after what? His conversion. After thou art converted, right? Then then
You should help your brother.
Yeah, help your brother, right? So the idea is that there's a conversion. And where do we see this, right? It's drawn along the lines of flesh and blood. Like what the flesh and blood teaches, right? Versus what the Father in heaven.
And he always reminds us to walk in the Spirit.
So the idea is that the idea is what Barnabas is kind of getting at is that there's two levels to everything, right? There's just following the law isn't going to make you righteous. Just being Torah observant on its own isn't going to give you the heart to love your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind.
So it's more than just rule keeping.
Yeah, it's more than just that. And so, in other words, the idea is that if you circumcise yourself, and think about it, Jesus was born under the law, right? He was circumcised, right? His parents sacrificed a turtle dove or pigeons or whatever. Well, you know what I'm saying? The idea was that they followed that law or that whatever it was. Yeah. But that isn't the end of the law, right? There is the fleshly circumcision, and then Thomas talks about also the true circumcision, right? Which is the circumcision in the spirit. So the idea is that there's this upper and lower level to everything. So there are two Moses. So he says, Moses, go down quickly, for thy people whom thou broughtest forth out of the land of Egypt have broken the law. And Moses understood and cast the 2 tables of the law out of his hands, and their covenant was broken because they couldn't. Their hearts had already turned. They could not follow the original law at that point, right? And it was so that the covenant of Jesus, the beloved, should be sealed in their hearts again versus their hands, in hope of his faith. And which is a convenient stopping point here.
Yeah. It's time.
So, go ahead.
That's a good place, right?
Okay.
In order the covenant of Jesus the beloved, or does it say the Father in yours? It says the beloved in this one, should be sealed in their hearts in hope of this faith.
Yeah.
So all points to Yeshua.
So, yeah. I mean, in other words, there's just the higher and the lower aspect of everything.
It's kind of funny. This reason, thank you.
Amazing. As
It's,
always.
Living in a world where everything's so loud, drowning out the whispers that could lift the cloud. You got questions burning deep inside your mind, but the answers have been waiting if you only take the time. You've been chasing after shadows, lost in the race, but truth's been knocking right up in your face. It's not a game, not just a story told. It's the light you need to see before your heart grows cold. Open your eyes, feel the truth knocking at your door. This is the moment, don't ignore it anymore. It's not about the past, it's about what's real. Let the truth come in and show you how to feel. Wake up now, let your mind engage. This is your time, step out of the cage. The world's been spinning, but here's your chance to find the truth that's been lost in the dance. You've been blinded by the noise, trapped in the lie, but the truth's been waiting just a blink of an eye. It's not too late to see what's always been there, to find the evidence, to breathe the clearer air. You've got the power, you've got the choice, to let the truth in, to hear its voice. It's a call to reason, a call to see what's been written, what's meant to be. Open your eyes, feel the truth knocking at your door. This is the moment, don't ignore it anymore. It's not about the past, it's about what's real. Let the truth come in and show you how to feel. Wake up now, let your mind engage. This is your time, step out of the cage. The world's been spinning, but here's your chance to find the truth that's been lost in the dance. Don't let the noise drown out what's true. You've got the strength to break right through. It's not about the fear, it's about the light, to see the world with clearer sight. Truth's been calling, waiting for the day you hear its voice and find your way. This is the knock that breaks the chain. This is the truth that heals the pain. Open your eyes, feel the truth knocking at your door. This is the moment, don't ignore it anymore. It's not about the past, it's about what's real. Let the truth come in and show you how to feel. Wake up now, let your mind engage. This is your time, step out of the cage. The world's been spinning, but here's your chance to find the truth that's been lost in the dance. So when the truth comes knocking, don't turn away. Let it in, let it guide your way. No more hiding, no more lies. It's time to live with open eyes. die. Every grain of sand is part of a plan and a divine hand. Bright and beautiful, the message is real. It's the light we fear, but the light that heals. Stand up to the darkness, enduring the strain. Break your chains and let truth reign. In the depths of the scriptures, where mysteries hide, a secret knowledge is waiting inside. The error that drives us no longer applies. Plumb the depths and your spirits will fly. Bright and beautiful, the message is real. It's the light we fear, but the light that heals. Stand up to the darkness, enduring the strain. Break your chains and let truth reign. With each step forward, your knowledge will grow. Light from the shadows, the truth overflows. His word is a beacon that is guiding our way. He speaks in the silence, hear what he has to say. Jude spoke of visions that were ancient and true, a hidden prophecy that's waiting for you. Peter's defense is a heavenly key, unlocking mysteries we're now meant to see.